I did not realize how critical the federal government has been with building the Black middle class until this commenter pointed it out a few videos ago. So thank you, Queen of Palmettos. I made a video about the class implications of this, and I want to extend the conversation to race. I'm Dr. Anna Kalschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I research the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds, as well as intersections with race, gender, and neurodivergence. I've worked in public, private, and academic sectors, including 4 federal agencies. And after this commenter pointed this out, I did look into, are there more people of color in the government? And it has been found that the government does hire more Black people than the private sector typically has. Of course, there are industry exceptions. You can always find an exception. Just like there are winged birds that don't fly, there's always an exception. However, something I will say is that the number one employer of people in my field typically has been the federal government, especially the military. And the reason being that there are implications for making mistakes with hiring that the government typically takes more seriously than corporate. Corporate thinks very short term. So, for example, a lot of the studies on should women be in combat and what were the criteria for that were done by IO psychologists. These studies looked at how much weight somebody needed to carry to be able to lift up the average sized man in his uniform with his weapons, and could they carry them appropriately? Because dragging somebody across the field, that's a landmine risk. You got to be able to pick them up properly and carry them out. And exercises like that were how they determined if you can do this regardless of your gender, then you can qualify for being in whatever part of the military. I believe that was for being on the front lines. So these are the types of things that IO psychologists do. And when I was entering my first federal agency, I remember they presented me, I was surprised to see a competency model, which looked at what are the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that are needed to do the job. What is the agency value? And here are the performance criteria we've made from it. And this is what good performance is, this is what bad performance is, this is what great performance is. And it's very hard to get great performance. And I was impressed because in my experience with corporate and academic, I had never seen anything like that. Y'all want to know some tea? Academics are some of the most hypocritical about this stuff, talking about reducing bias and does the research on what is good for hiring and doesn't practice it at all within the academy, even IO psychology programs. There's not a universal hiring across the Fed. It depends by agency, but it is typically better, in my experience, in seeing that than corporate, which a lot of it is go with your gut, similar to academia. And because there's so much work on bias reduction, I could see that absolutely being why more Black people have thrived in the federal government. And to be clear, the only people who are given bonus points when they apply, even with affirmative action, the only people given bonus points when they apply to a federal job are veterans and disabled people. You do get extra points on your application if you have a documented, medically documented disability, or if you are a veteran, especially a disabled veteran. There are no extra points for being a person of color, a woman, anything else. The purpose of all of these systems is not to let unqualified, underrepresented groups in. The purpose is to not let underqualified people who are part of the majority in because of the bias. Regardless of what happens with the federal government and the employees there, I think this is a good example of why hiring using evidence-based techniques matters, and how it does make for hiring people more based on merit than identity. And if you don't think that's true, if you don't think it's possible that Black people are more qualified to do things than is typically represented in corporate, then you need to ask yourself why you assume they are not qualified.